Welcome
Hello.
to Module 3
Yeah,
of Nico Ethics.
our third and final module.
Third and final. Yeah, we've
Yeah.
really got through Aristotle pretty quickly. Well done.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to recap what we have talked about so far, Aristotle believes that there is such a thing as the chief good, and he gets to a point where he says this is happiness. The chief good is happiness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he
As in,
elaborates.
like fulfillment and flourishing.
Eudaimonia.
Yeah.
Flourishing. So not happiness as you would traditionally think of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of asks, so what is this thing that we call happiness? Let's give a clearer account of that. And he says that we can achieve it through exercising our function, because anything that exercises its function well becomes a good and happy, flourishing version of itself.
Yeah.
Yep, and so he deduces that the human function is reason, so we must use reason to lead us to eudaimonia. And so therefore reason is kind of the path to the chief good.
Yeah. Great. So what we're looking at today is how we can then use reason to find moral virtue to help us achieve that, to lead us to eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia.
Thank you.
Wait, I always think of it more like
Okay,
not as
yes.
using reason to find moral virtue, but
Mhm.
if you reason well, you'll naturally find moral
Okay.
virtue. I don't know, am I right?
I think it's probably a combination of both.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so there's probably some times where you've really got to think about, or it will probably eventually become more naturally,
Yeah.
be thinking about what is virtuous.
Yeah.
But also, if you do just generally in life use reason, then the virtues should come to you. Is that what you're more saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, as we're going through today, be adding some stuff to your course notes, or putting stuff in there for the first time even, to help them make sense. So this stuff relates to page 12 of the course notes. Here, and this is chapters 5 and 6, he's going on about, okay, well, we've got these virtues, moral virtues. Are they a passion, a capacity, or a state of character? Now, in chapter 5, he rules out both passions and capacities. Passions are kind of just like they're our emotions, and he says that that can't be what virtues are, because virtues are with virtues we think whether something is good or bad, and we don't think good or bad is actually the emotions. And it's not the capacities, which is your ability to actually do something, do the virtuous action or the feel of passion, because again, we don't think that the capacity to do that's what's good or bad about you. Instead, it's that they're a state of character. So he kind of vaguely describes that. If you have a look at the actual chapter, it's quite difficult to really break down. But my take on it is that if you do virtuous things, virtuous actions, that you will have a particular state of character. So it's more the end result part, all right?
Well, is that
Not
to do with
the
the habit
ultimate
thing?
end.
Like, if you continue practicing it,
Yeah.
eventually you will become the virtuous man.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So it's part of your
if
character.
you're doing things in the right way and for the right reasons, remember, from chapter 4, then you'll have a state of character, okay? And so he says, and what this slide is about, is that this state of character, being virtue, both will bring into good condition the thing of which it is the virtue or the excellence, and it will also mean that the work that thing does will be virtuous or excellent.
Well,
so,
that makes no sense to me. Can you explain?
Okay, so with the example of the eye, so the virtues, and because they're a state of character, mean that it is if it's a virtuous eye, it is an excellent eye, virtuous eye, and then it also will do its function of being an eye, so seeing, it'll
Yeah.
also see really well. So
All
it'll
right.
do that well.
So
And
is
so,
he relating that to humans as well?
yes, he ultimately will. So a horse is an excellent horse. If it's virtuous, it'll be an excellent horse. That also means that it does its function of, what's the horse one? Riding and carrying someone and awaiting battle or something in a really excellent manner. Okay, so that's the horse. And then with the human, if we look at...
That just seems obvious to me, though. Like, if it's a virtuous thing...
Yeah, it's not that important. So at the end of first paragraph of chapter 5... Sorry, no, that's a lie. At the end of the first paragraph of chapter 6, it says, in the virtue of man or a human will be the state of character, which makes a man good and which makes him do his work well. So he's saying, so for a human, the particular virtue that you're going to look at is what makes them good. So that's why he's talking about moral virtues, and that's going to make him do his work well. So, yeah. So make sure you copy that down. Alright, so this next section is more important than the random stuff we just went over, but it's also something that he's covered really before when he was talking about defects and excess in chapter 2, I think. But here is where he's clearly putting forward his most central, one of his most famous ideas of moral virtue as a mean. And he's going to make this series of statements leading to kind of a conclusion that virtue is basically a mean because it's aiming at the intermediate.
Okay, so he's proving his point about virtue being a mean.
Yeah, exactly. So he will start by saying that everything in the world and particularly all the moral virtues we have are divisible in some way. Okay? So you can have more or less of them.
So you can be more courageous, less courageous.
Yep.
Or equally courageous, for example. Is that what he's saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And this is reintroducing those ideas of excess and defect. So the equal lies between those two vices. Okay, and that's kind of going to be your mean. So he's using this language of it being an equal or a center, but we're going to see a bit later that he actually says it could lie a bit closer to one of them. But for now, you're thinking about it. It's kind of lying. If you had a line, it's lying about halfway in the line. That's your mean.
Yeah. And
either side, you've got your defect or your excess.
Sure. What does he mean by equal is determined relatively to us?
So that equal or intermediate point, which is the mean.
Does that just mean it's going to be different for everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and that he goes on the example of in the text of Milo, the wrestler, and about how for him, like virtues to do with how much you eat, and I'm forgetting the good word for it, but like overindulgence for me in terms of the amount of meat and steak and veg that I eat, will be different to Milo the wrestler, because Milo the wrestler needs to get lots of protein and he needs to be getting a lot more of that stuff into him. So he'll eat a couple of plates full.
Yeah. A normal meal for him would be overindulging for you.
Yes.
But it's actually the mean for him.
Yes.
Okay. So the mean is different for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what he means relatively. Yeah. Okay, so this fourth point is kind of addressing, well, why should we be aiming for this if there's this intermediate thing? So if there is this point between excess and defect that apparently is the intermediate kind of equal point that we should be aiming for, why are we doing this? And his key reason for that, and it also backs up why it is a mean, is that he thinks that as soon as you're kind of straying into that area of excess or defect, it becomes quite noticeable. So he uses the analogy of an artist and creating a wonderful, great piece of art, which is what I've selected here, the girl with the pearl earring, which is, I think, quite a stunning, very vivid...
Good use of light.
Yeah, excellent use of light. And so, if the artist, or if somebody came along and decided, I'm going to digitally alter this and did some weird stuff to it, say added a more colourful background or something like that,
Yeah.
it probably wouldn't be a great piece of art anymore.
Well, no, because the artist has created something that is not too much, not too little. It's just right.
Exactly.
All right. As
Sounds
I like to say,
Goldilocks.
the Goldilocks principle.
Good.
That's exactly what it is.
Good job. So, when it comes to actually seeking the mean, though, he says that if we were to be pursuing something, and I use the example today of like eating cake. So if I'm eating cake and I have one piece, I enjoy myself, it's nice, I feel some pleasure, that's all right, remember?
Okay.
Some contentment or pleasantness, that's good. But if I was like, oh, I really want that second or third piece of cake, and I eat them, I'm going to be loving life, don't get me wrong, but I'm also going to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that cake.
You mean just because
I'll be feeling
you're
like
feeling too
good.
much pleasure?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So his point is that as soon as you stray outside of that intermediate, so that one piece of cake, you can kind of tell in yourself because you're feeling too much pleasure or you're feeling too much pain. Okay? And that's for him that kind of how the
So you should be that's
realised.
just weird though. Like you should be feeling just the right amount of pleasure. How do you know what just the right amount is? Isn't more pleasure better?
No, but in some situations you clearly know when you've gone too far.
But
like if you've decided, if I've got a day on the weekend where I'm like, oh, I've really got all this work to do, but I'm just going to watch some TV.
yeah.
And I stay there for 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
Okay,
But
you clearly
you're not
know
actually-
you've gone overboard.
My argument would be you're not actually feeling pleasure, you're actually feeling guilt and horribleness
Yeah.
and distress in
Yeah.
that situation. That's how you know you've gone
Well, you're
too
also
far.
feeling pleasure because you're enjoying watching TV.
Okay, I kind of get it.
Okay, good. So his final claim for why the intermediate is the mean and moral virtue is the mean is that mean or intermediate is praised as a success. And clearly something is virtue and is virtuous according to him. Again, this might be a good one to evaluate. If it is praised as being success and is successful. So if it's successful, it must be virtue. The intermediate, it's what's praised, so it must be virtue.
Whatever, Aristotle. You're weird.
So there you go. So therefore, moral virtue is a mean, because it is the intermediate that we kind of seek out.
Yep. Okay.
Alright.
And if we're exercising reason, we'll naturally be reasonable. I guess that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The mean is more reasonable. You're not being excessive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, so just very quickly we want to go over a couple of evaluation points which you have on page 14, I think.
Yep. Page 14.
Of your course notes. So there's a number of questions there which you should have a go at answering sometime because they are possibly really good sources of evaluations. But we just thought we'd go over a couple. So this first one is asking, so it's saying that all kind of ethical dilemmas or situations. So it's an example of some ethical situations, whether to any decision about what's right or wrong.
Abortion right?
Yeah, they're really extreme ones. But you have like multiple every day. So
like, should I
even do more study?
Should I? This is the one that I always have. Should I photocopy all these bits of paper?
Yeah.
To help my kids, or should I save the environment?
Yep, good. Do I go to school? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. That could be one. Yeah.
Should we have education? I don't know. It's a very big one. Anyway, so there's all these kind of dilemmas that we have to decide what right or wrong is. Alright? And this first question is saying that are all those susceptible, so these are really technical words, so again, good practice for your breaking down exam questions. But susceptible means open to, it's a hard word.
Timmy.
To quantitative analysis. So kind of breaking down to the quantitative means numbers, but yes, well it does.
Yeah, I know. It does.
So breaking it down to some kind of clear-cut formula of, like, if the mean was a 2 and the excess and defect were a 1 and a 3, and giving them a point score or something and slotting them in? Could we boil everything down to that? All right?
So the criticism, the evaluation
Yes.
point here is saying Aristotle's whole mean thing
Yeah.
implies that all these complex moral dilemmas which face us day to day
Yeah.
and which seem very subjective, right?
Yeah.
Very subjective, as in different. They seem different from everyone's different perspectives. His doctrine of the mean seems to imply that all those problems can be boiled down to a set of numbers.
Yeah, and formulas and...
Yes, and this intuitively doesn't seem right to us. It doesn't seem like we should be able to analyse those problems with quantitative analysis, meaning like numerical analysis.
Yeah, that there's much more to it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's much more to ethics than just are you hitting the intermediate between these 2 points.
Yeah, it's like what I teach my legal kids, that there's like, one of the great things about law, which is very ethical, is that there's this huge grey area that the law might say it has to happen this way, but it's not always that easy, that there's so much more to it. And so how do you have this system of
So the law...
quantitative analysis?
Are you saying the law is kind of the quantitative analysis, but it doesn't capture...
The existing law is, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it doesn't capture all the complexities.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can have this very rigid set structure or construct or formula, which is what he's advocating, suggesting we should have.
Yeah.
And that the actual, the complexity of it all, and also, as you were saying, the subjective nature of it, can mean that it just doesn't work. All right?
Okay, so basically evaluation point 1 is the doctrine of the mean might be too simplistic to apply to ethics. And the second evaluation point here asks, can you think of a situation where the doctrine of the mean would prove unhelpful to the deliberations, that means the decision making, of the ethical agent, so a person who's trying to make an ethical decision. So is the mean helpful in all situations? And look, I think that a common criticism of virtue ethics, which is what Aristotle is advocating, is that it actually doesn't, like, if you compare it to something like deontology or utilitarianism, virtue ethics doesn't give us like a clear set of instructions for how we should act in any given circumstance. It gives us kind of instructions for how we should be. We should be virtuous, you know, like we should try to have these qualities of courage or temperance or whatever. But it doesn't say, okay, in this situation, you should act in this way. So, for example, like utilitarianism does give us that. It says, in any situation, you should choose the action which leads to the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So if you're faced with a problem like the trolley problem, have you guys done that?
No.
It's like...
Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it
It's
in
a
class.
long story, but it's like, who should you kill, 5 people or 1 person? Basically. If, like, utilitarianism would clearly say, kill the 1 person, but Aristotle, what would he say? Would he say just be virtuous? Be courageous? Well, what does that... Even if I am courageous, how does that mean I should act? It doesn't give a clear set of instructions.
So that kind of really complex example, like the trolley problem, which me and my class can quickly talk about, is an example here of, somewhere where his virtue ethics really potentially isn't that helpful. So have a think about some other situations that might be similar to that. So chapter 7 is where he tries to help people understand his theory that virtues are a mean by giving lots of examples. So in your course notes on page 15, there's this table. You need to work your way through each of those things on the left. He mentions to all of them in the text. You need to go find it. He clearly says for all of them what the mean is and also what the defect and what the excess are. So find them and put them there. If you don't quite get what some of the words he's using mean, please go and try and find the meaning to those, okay? And make sure you understand.
Some of them are pretty obscure, aren't they? So
if you're really struggling, persevere. Like, really, you won't need to know all of these for the exam, but it would be good to have up your belt a good understanding of, say, 3 or 4 of them. Okay, or a couple of them. All right. So what we've done here is just very quickly an example of what he's going on about from the text, And so this is for the virtue of honour and dishonour. Okay? So we have the mean is obviously being honour, having honour, which is
being a knight.
Yes, which is the knight in the middle.
So what is having honour?
I guess being like...
So is it being kind of confident? Or thinking you're good but not too good?
Yeah, yes, yeah, no, that's probably quite good. Knowing that you are, and knowing that you're doing the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're doing the right thing. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So, like, think like those Japanese samurais with their dishonor. Like, if they do the wrong thing, then they have to, kill themselves.
Yeah.
And they put the samurai sword into themselves because they're knowing that they've done the wrong thing.
So honor means knowing you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is clearly the greatest slide of all time.
Yeah. I'm pretty
Do you want
proud
to
of it.
explain?
So what Aristotle says that the defect of honor is undue humility.
So I like this. This is what my father always accuses me of having.
Okay. Yeah.
Putting yourself down all the time.
Exactly.
For no reason, to the extent that it just annoys people.
Yeah, exactly. So if you remember from Harry Potter, hopefully you're all huge Harry Potter fans and have read the books. Okay.
Yeah.
Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, who's on the left here, he is notorious for thinking just he's shit. And, well, that's all. He constantly went on about, I'm so terrible. Voldemort.
Yeah, he's very simpering and
Yeah.
he kind of, puts himself down constantly.
So that's undue humility. So humility is probably a virtue.
Humility is a virtue.
But undue humility is where you just constantly...
unnecessary
good.
humility.
Putting yourself down.
Cool.
And then the excess of it, according to the text, is empty vanity. So I don't quite get what it means by empty. It probably could have been left at vanity.
Vanity, yeah.
But so I just thought of you guys are probably too young to know
that's such a
Zoolander.
tragedy if you are.
Yeah, you should really see it as quite classic. And Ben Stiller doing classic Zoolander move, blue steel there. So clearly an incredibly vain. Also, empty maybe in that.
So he thinks he's amazing.
Yeah.
Peter Pettigrew thinks he's terrible.
And honor
and
is just like...
Zoolander thinks he's amazing for no reason.
Yeah.
That's what it means by empty, probably. You can think you're amazing for good reason, but...
Okay, that's the night. But...
Yeah, okay.
You still probably want to avoid thinking you're amazing. Okay, so that's how it works. Okay, so nice pictures to help you there.
So, chapter 8, I'd encourage you to have a read of this. Tim and I were just discussing that we can't figure out exactly what the purpose of this chapter is, but it does have... it's got some information, which it's obviously important for you to understand. So, the main points that Aristotle is making in chapter 8 are that, first of all... so when you've got the mean, you've got two extremes and an intermediate. And he says that both of those extremes are actually opposites to the intermediate. So, for example, if the intermediate is courage and the extremes are rashness and cowardice, cowardice is the opposite of courage, and also rashness is the opposite of courage. So they're all opposed to each other, right? Mm-hmm. However, he makes the point that some of the intermediates will actually be closer to one or other of the extremes. So, in the same example, courage it's not directly in the middle of cowardice and rashness. It's actually a bit closer to rashness.
Yeah.
Because, if you're being courageous, that means you have to kind of stand up for things. Yeah. And if you're being rash, you're also standing up for things, but you're doing it too much. Whereas courage is the complete absence of standing up for things.
Cowardice is...
Sorry. Cowardice is the complete absence of standing up for things.
Further from courage.
Than rashness is. Yeah. So we just have to be careful of like looking out for certain intermediates being closer to one end of the extremes. And this might help us actually find the mean, because we can be conscious that it might be closer to one or the other end.
Yeah.
We're getting to the part of the text where he kind of gives us advice for finding the mean.
Yeah.
And finally, in chapter 8, he says that there are a couple of reasons for why the mean might be closer to one side. One of the reasons is just like, it's just a natural occurrence, like courage is just naturally closer to rashness. But the other thing is, from what I can gather, we humans often have a tendency to go one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So I think that maybe we have more of a tendency to go to cowardice rather than rashness. Do you reckon?
Yes.
Or he gives another
depends.
example.
Again, it's subjective.
He gives another example. We go more towards self-indulgence than towards propriety. So we're more likely to say self-indulgence is further away from the mean because we go to that more often, and so we think more badly of it.
Okay.
There you go. All right, and final slide, Aristotle gives 3 pieces of advice for helping us to find the mean. So I quite like this quote that you've got here. It's no easy task to be good, because finding the mean is quite a complex matter, right? So this is why we consider goodness rare and laudable. You know, it's worthy of praise because it's quite difficult to be good. So he gives us 3 bits of advice for helping to be good and find the mean. The first one is... the first one actually links to what I just talked about in chapter 8. He says, be aware of which extreme is further away from the mean and try to avoid that extreme the most. So with courage, cowardice, rashness, cowardice is further from the mean, so we should always try to avoid cowardice. So even if we end up going a bit more towards rashness, that's okay because that's actually closer to the mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Second piece of advice is consider your own nature. So you have to analyse yourself as a person and think about what kind of response you most naturally gravitate towards. So if you tend to be more of a coward, you should probably steer clear of cowardice. You should, actively avoid cowardice. Or if you tend to be more rash, you should make sure you actively avoid rashness and go more towards the cowardice side. Making sense?
Yep.
And finally, the third bit of advice. This is a funny one. Again, pleasure. We should always be wary of pleasure. Like if something causes us pleasure, just be careful of that because we love pleasure. And if one extreme, so if cowardice brings you more pleasure than rashness, you're naturally going to go like way too hard into... we naturally tend to go way too much towards the thing that gives us most pleasure. So if being a coward gives you pleasure, you should definitely avoid being a coward because otherwise you'll get too wrapped up in the pleasure of being a coward. Cool. As you can notice, some of these pieces of advice kind of contradict each other. How can you follow all that advice at the one time?
Yeah.
But we'll talk more about that in class. Cool. Thanks for listening.